all have seen movies that, even though the opinions tend to go towards negative, we had fun watching. Whether they're enjoyably bad, had ups and downs, or you consider them good for what they are, they were worth the time. So these are my top 10 movies I enjoyed that received mixed reactions. Rules for this list are: only movies that I've seen in recent years so they're still fresh in my memory, and they need to be a mixed bag by reputation, not because they might have a low rating on a website. Also, this list is entirely opinion based. If you don't like the movies I'm about to mention, that's fine by me. With that aside, let's start the list. Number 10. Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. While not as good as its predecessors, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull was a decent adventure movie that brought a nostalgic hero back to the big screen. It gives you what you expect from Indiana Jones, going on a journey, over-the-top action sequences, some comedic moments, and in this case, it had a nice returning role of Karen Allen. It definitely seems to go for a sillier route, like Temple of Doom, which does create some so bad it's good moments. Unfortunately for the precious Indiana Jones name, it seemed to have a little bit too much fun in its silliness. The fridge scene or alien scene became infamous for how much hate they received. Even South Park made an entire episode on the sheer amount of hate this movie received, comparing watching the movie to witnessing a rape. In terms of story, this is a forgettable movie. The side characters aren't interesting, like how his son talks to him in rather arrogant fashion. Or there's this side character that betrays Indy, but for some reason Indy keeps trusting him for the rest of the movie, like Indy learned nothing from the mistake of trusting that guy. It's definitely a movie that depends on the mood you're in, but I was in the right mood and found enough enjoyment to say it was worth the time. Number 9. The Killing Joke. The Killing Joke feels more like watching 2 long episodes of a Batman TV show than it feels like watching a movie, but that doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. Let me make one thing clear. I don't read comics, but I have watched a large section of the animated DC movies and I enjoyed most of them. With that in mind, I actually liked the first 30 minutes of this movie that I've heard nothing but hate about. Batgirl has always been a small side role in animated DC movies, and it was nice to see more sides of her for once. She thought fighting crime was fun, without taking into account all the possible dangers, and she learned to be careful the hard way. There's a nicely structured story arc, and it felt like the Batgirl of the beginning was different at the ending of the arc. A harmless piece of entertainment. After 30 minutes, it's like jumping into a completely different movie that, in terms of story, has nothing to do with the story they started with. Thus the comparison to a TV show I made earlier. The second story, the one that is the main attraction of this movie, is about one of the darkest Jokers I've seen in an animated picture. Stuff went down and it truly felt like a happy ending was an impossibility.
Sadly, our venue wasn't built with the disabled in mind.
Why are you doing this?
To prove a point.
It's the Joker going all out in his insanity, and the heroes trying to regain their sanity that creates an intense but exciting ride. Mark Hamill returned for the role specially for this adaptation, and as always, he gives a great performance. The only thing I really disliked about this story part is that they gave the Joker a backstory. Not knowing anything about his origin was one of the things I liked about him, never knowing whether there was truth to stories he told or that it was all entirely fiction. Aside from that, I thought this was entertaining, with a harmless short story of Batgirl and an intense Joker story.
Yes!
Number 8. Passengers. Passengers is a science fiction drama about a man on a spaceship, waking up from hypersleep without a way to get back into sleep and with no one to accompany him. The first part of Passengers I would describe as Castaway in space, and as someone who loves Castaway, this was a good thing. Seeing how someone is being isolated with no hope to get out, trying to survive on his own in a giant spaceship is a clever direction I haven't seen another movie take. You see how a man spends his time trying to entertain himself by tons of creative science fiction inventions, and how he uses these inventions to fight the inevitable depression. The slow and quiet pace truly makes you experience the same loneliness and hopelessness of his situation. How it's just him and the ship forever. It's this struggle I think is genuinely strong character development. So when the second part of the movie took place, I was still invested. Given it's on every poster and in every trailer, I don't think I'll spoil anything by saying this, but he wakes up a woman as a desperate attempt to fight the loneliness. It's a dark and awful thing to do, since he gives her the same fate he has. But this movie does such a good job at making you sympathize with him that throughout the entire second part of the film, I didn't know whether to dislike him or be happy because of the fact he found happiness. The second part is all about seeing these two bond through very natural conversations, and they're a likable couple. Till this point, I think this is a good film, but from the third part the movie loses its spark. There are a ton of unnecessary cliches as an attempt to make it a more spectacular movie, but the story elements the cliches address come out of left field and adds nothing to the story of these two bonding. It's almost like the movie paused, you jump into another film, then waited until the end to actually continue the story they were starting with. I liked it when it was just a straightforward story about two people bonding like they're the last people on Earth, making it a story that was driven through sheer character interaction. The last third was not necessary, and I wish it was different, but still I was entertained for the most part by this movie. If you think you're interested, I say give it a go. Number 7. 8 Crazy Nights. Okay, this is a movie I think is genuinely bad. The cheap argument I can make is, just go and watch the Nostalgia Critic review. I agree on pretty much everything he says. But the key difference between his opinion and mine is that I think it's an enjoyably bad film. In case you're not familiar, 8 Crazy Nights is an Adam Sandler animated Hanukkah movie about an unlikable guy who gets to live with an old man who wants to teach him how to be a nice guy. This movie is such a bizarre combination between really pretty animation similar to the Iron Giant animation style and a mean-spirited dirty comedy that I was fascinated by every choice they made. The voice of the elderly man and woman are ear-bleedingly awful, but at the same time I couldn't stop laughing at how bad it is.
Take whatever you want, but please don't chop my legs off!
Would you pie in one's life with your sister, friends, or imaginary wife?
The jokes revolve around poop, making fun of fat people, laughing at others suffering, or other filthy humor. I constantly asked why. Why? In terms of positives, the animation is very pretty to look at, the songs were fun to listen to, and there were a handful of jokes I thought were genuinely fun. If you think you can laugh at how bad this is, or you just really like these types of jokes, it might be a fun movie to try. Number 6. Hail Caesar. Often seen as one of the weaker Coen brothers movies, I thought there was enough good in this to make a viewing I don't regret. This movie is incredibly strange. It sets up a ton of plot lines, only to follow little of them, and even then it doesn't really give a satisfying conclusion to most of them. It introduces a ton of likable characters portrayed by famous actors, only to let them disappear after a brief appearance. You follow certain events that take place during the filming of a Caesar movie, involving multiple different characters. Some of the events are connected, others completely unrelated. This lack of focus is one of the movie's flaws, but at the same time this is what makes it so interesting. By completely ignoring the traditional story formulas and doing whatever it pleases, it can create a ton of different funny scenarios. You can never, and I mean never, predict what the next scene will offer. The one moment you can get a long musical sequence, only to get a long talking sequence, only to get a short joke crammed here, etc, etc. The acting is brilliant and the characters were fun to follow, creating enough moments of joy. It can often drag or lose itself in long, pointless sequences, but as a whole, I thought this was an entertaining sit. Number 5. The Expendables 3. I'm going to say something very controversial. Expendables 3 is my favorite Expendables movie. Yeah, it's extremely cheesy and cliché, but that is exactly the point of these movies. Seeing a lot of famous action actors together in a big budget B-action flick. The movies are full of self-reflection humor, some good action sequences, and it's just fun seeing these famous faces together on the big screen. But what makes part 3 my favorite is that I actually like the story of this one. I can't even remember what the first 2 Expendables were about, but this narrative stuck with me. It's about the famous actors admitting they're getting old, admitting their greatest time is behind them, and it's time for younger, newer action actors to take the stage.
Age is just a state of mind. You know, you're only old when you surrender, when you give up, and I haven't, not yet.
A story that makes sense in the context of the movie, but also says something about the actors in real life. Antonio Banderas plays a very controversial role of the comedic sidekick that won't shut his mouth. On the one hand, yeah, he can get annoying and I understand people disliking him. But at the same time, it feels like a throwback to comic relief characters from older action movies. In a strange way, it actually paid homage to the cheesy older action movies by adding its downsides in as well. I definitely had fun watching it and therefore it deserves a spot on the list. Number 4. Into the Woods. Based on the famous musical, this is a darker Disney movie not suitable for children. I'm not particularly fond of the musicals, nor do I hate them. Into the Woods is a musical where a large section of the story is told in song, which made it walk on thin ice for me. Yet, I found there to be a charm in the narrative and dark atmosphere. Into the Woods tells multiple famous fairy tales at the same time, but instead of showing the important parts of the story, it decides to only show the characters as they're on their way to their stories. For example, rather than seeing Cinderella at the ball, you see her going to the ball or coming from the ball. We all know what happens at the ball, so the movie decides not to focus on that. Instead, it decided to focus on all the different characters meeting in the woods. A large section of the time, you're stuck in a single place. Yet there are so many things going on, I wanted to be in the woods. I wanted to see what character would enter the woods next, or what would happen to a character I saw earlier. This creates a rather unique way of telling the famous fairy tales, since it focuses much more on the responses of the characters, rather than the events they overcome. But the most remarkable aspect of this movie is the third arc. This movie could have stopped 70 minutes in and it could have a perfect happy ending you're used to seeing in fairy tales. But in a surprising dark twist, the characters find out that what they wished for wasn't what they need. In fact, the feeling of safety is completely gone and I even started to fear for the lives of the characters. This dark switch is completely different from what I expected to see, and it gave a nice new look on fairy tales I grew up with, that maybe the things we want aren't always what we need. It's a movie that heavily depends on the mood you're in due to the constant singing, some rather silly parts, like this song for example.
Agony, oh the torture they teach. What's as intriguing or half so fatiguing as what's out of reach?
But I was very pleasantly surprised in how much I enjoyed this movie, and I feel it deserves more appreciation than it got. Number 3. Jumanji. Let me just get the negatives out of the way. The CGI is horrible. It's extremely fake and outdated. Even as a kid I thought it looked too fake. The kid actors are stiff and bland in how emotionless they are. Kirsten Dunst definitely got better as she grew older. And it feels kind of forced that everyone decides to play the game, even when they're in a situation where stopping or not beginning at all would be a legit option. That aspect of the story doesn't feel as natural or well developed as the others, but aside from those negatives, I think this is a good adventure movie. Not so bad it's good, not alright, but it's something I genuinely had a lot of fun watching and I wouldn't say no to another viewing. Jumanji is an original idea about every board game player's greatest fear. A haunted board game that challenges you to survive life-threatening scenarios in order to beat it. You can see and experience the pure fear of the characters with every roll of the dice, praying the game will show mercy in its next dangers. But what makes this particular adventure movie work is that it isn't just a spectacle ride. This could have so easily been a movie about bland characters versus nature, but no, this movie does everything in its power to develop the characters. Each roll of the dice, especially the first couple of rolls, has a big build-up, and the movie shows what emotional influence the outcome has. A kid gets stuck in the board game itself, and it's not until 26 years later he gets out as an adult man. It's Robin Williams who plays the adult man, and he knocks it out of the park in this role. The scene where he gets out of the board made me sad when I was a kid. How he has this childlike enthusiasm as he's finally home again, only to find out his parents died while trying to find him. It's still a powerful and touching moment. The rest of the movie has exciting action sequences, provide plenty of comedy, but it doesn't shy away from the emotional responses either. Number 2. Spongebob Out of the Water. Even though the movie received mixed reactions, I thought Out of the Water was a ton of fun. It brought me back to the time I watched SpongeBob as a kid, and it succeeds in capturing that absurd comedic tone the earlier episodes have. throughout the entire movie there are original humorous scenarios in which we see all the nostalgic characters in action, including some rather trippy parts, like this scene where Plankton literally enters SpongeBob's mind.
So much sweetness. I think I'm gonna be sick.
The animation is high quality, and when the characters turn CGI, they look just as you would expect CGI SpongeBob characters to look. In terms of downsides, the entire out-of-the-water aspect is the climax of the film, rather than its main focus, which is falsely advertised. And there is an epic rap battle, which is a really confusing addition to the movie that doesn't fit well in the context. Aside from that, SpongeBob Out of the Water is a funny, feel-good cartoon that is both loyal to the TV show as well as it does its own thing. If you loved SpongeBob growing up but never bothered to watch this, I'd say give it a go. I have a little confession to make. This was originally going to be a top 20. Hell, I even considered making it a top 30 because there were just way too many movies I had for this list. Others didn't make the list either because they received too much positive reviews, I don't like them as much as the ones from the list, or I don't think they're as interesting to talk about. Here's a quick summary of movies I considered for the list. Legend of Tarzan, Sea of Trees, Man of Steel, Suicide Squad, X-Men Origins, Wolverine, Going in Style, Shrek the Third, The Black Cauldron, Monsters University, Dumb and Number 2, Unfriended, Insidious 3, The Matrix sequels, and last but not least, Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Man Tell No Tales. With that aside, let's get to number 1. My favorite movie I enjoyed that received mixed reactions is Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. Often seen as the least of the Mad Max films. Before Fury Road, Beyond Thunderdome was my favorite Mad Max movie. The first 45 minutes of this movie I think is a solid 10 out of 10. It's everything I love about the insanity that is the Mad Max universe done at its best. The world and characters are incredibly bizarre, yet there is so much creativity and life added to it. This movie feels like being in a different world, and with every scene there is something new to surprise you. Everything feels organic and logically connected, for as weird as some scenarios might be. Whenever I see some of the things from this universe, I don't know whether to be intimidated or burst out in laughter. I haven't made a list about 1 versus 1 fights in movies yet, but if I were, the cage fight from Beyond Thunderdome would easily make the list. The character of Max transformed throughout the series. In the first one, he was a likable, heroic type. In the second one, he became a more silent, more serious and darker hero. In Beyond Thunderdome, he got over the loss of his wife, and he accepted his place in this world, becoming a much more confident tough guy that provides plenty of hilarious sarcastic commentary. It's this sarcastic guy trying to survive in this dark, messed up apocalyptic future that provides golden entertainment. It's hilarious, action-packed, dark, gritty, suspenseful, and this entire world feels alive. It's after 45 minutes the movie loses its 10 out of 10 strength to me. Max encounters a bunch of children and gets involved in their lives. My problem is that the entire movie becomes too kid-friendly from this point on. The jokes are milder, action is sillier, and it does take some time for the story to get going again. Almost like you're in a completely different film and, after a while, the movie suddenly remembered it was telling you a story about the Thunderdome. It has this creative strangeness to it though, that fits in the Mad Max universe. It just doesn't blend very smoothly with the Thunderdome story. But aside from that, I still think this part of the film is pretty good, and the movie as a whole is still a great sit. Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, easily my number 1 movie that received mixed reactions. So, do you like some movies that received mixed reactions? Let me know in the comments and thanks for watching.